Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome back to another exciting virtual tour with the Foss Waterway Seaport, and of course, me, your guide for the evening, Chris from Pretty Gritty Tours, and welcome to the Soul Salmon experience. Now, I don't know what you know about Soul Salmon. I don't know if you were involved in this epic undertaking, but hopefully by the end of our tour tonight, you will have a firm understanding of what the Soul Salmon are and their importance and impact on the community. Those, I think, are my pledges to you guys. But first,
Arti duf arti swatwiftwood atis poyalapabs, a slathlasil, alti disha tu alturi tuha.
It is the land right here that the Puyallup people have lived on since the beginning.
Deshav tid fachas alti swatwiftwood.
This right here is where we are in the world, our homelands.
Uyayus chas atiswa tufted atis tu ishachas. Ukacha chas tis badadat chas. Uoch twati halalt atiswa tufted atis boyalapabs.
We work on our ancestral lands. We raise our children who go to school on the land of the Puyallup people.
Ohegwad chas ti shwananam tliti, ohashitab ti pasted okwaredu.
We acknowledge that the Medicine Creek Treaty was signed for the whites to take our land for their benefit.
Ochashitab chas atis hunanam tliti atis swatwiftwood chas. Otsuti pasted squat lup swatwiftwood lup. Land
was assigned to our people. The Caucasians said, "This is your land," and they took that land from us too.
Okararitub chas atiswa twitwud chas. Odzak atab tis kliti.
Our land was stolen from us. Treaties were broken.
Toch didich chas autislachel.
But we are still here today.
Hui chasa tu kwelin, chasa tu ish, chasa tu alalos, chasa tu tol shot sidam.
Our people forage for food and materials, we pick berries, we canoe, we practice our traditional ways, and we speak Twelshutsi.
Just as our ancestors did.
Hoya chas.
We are finished.
well, it wouldn't be a virtual tour about salmon without talking about the Puyallup tribe and acknowledging that we're on their ancestral lands. And they're integral to this whole story, as are the salmon themselves. But this all began, and with the bad news, that salmon have been disappearing from the community. I don't know if you're aware of this, but there was a rapid decline in soul salmon. And if you're asking yourself, what the heck is soul salmon? You're not alone. Very recently, someone was getting ready to renovate parts of the Foss Waterway Seaport Museum, and they noticed that this fine salmon was up on the ledge there. It used to be right above the restrooms. And some questions came around as to where this fish came from and what it was all about. And the answers are as complicated and opaque as they are straightforward. But this is a soul salmon. And you've probably seen one around the Tacoma or Greater Washington or even Pacific Northwest area. But this is an approximately 8-foot-long fiberglass fish that weighs in about 150 pounds. And it's one of many spawning throughout the area here. But the origin of where each of these came from is a little more mysterious, as is how they ended up where they did. So if you're ever in the seaport, you'll notice this one. But it harkens back to the importance of salmon in the region. You know, getting to hear from the Puyallup tribe there for a moment, we are reminded about the fact that salmon has been not just an integral, but the key part of this region from time immemorial. This photograph was taken in 1886 of Puyallup Indians with longboats here, and they're out on Commencement Bay. And you can see right behind him there, that long stretch is the Northern Pacific Railroad Bridge. But this was right before a large fishing trip that was going out. And here you can see more. This is also taken in 1886. And there's so few photographs, unfortunately, of the Puyallup at this time. But this also shows a lot of the trade that was coming in onto the shores of Commencement Bay with the Puyallup. moving right over here, this is in 1907. And this is the first image I've been able to find where you get to see the major shift of salmon being a primarily Puyallup fished product. And now a lot more Norwegian, German, Croatian immigrants are showing up here to the Tacoma region, certainly after the boom of the 1880s. And now it's bonanza. Fish is the gold of the Pacific Northwest for a long time. Timber and salmon were the two main products, and it remained not just a major cash product for the area, but certainly a socio-economic one as well. So many photos you'll find throughout the archives of salmon bakes. This is one of my particular favorites. This is Jerry Meeker of the Puyallup tribe. He settled out in sort of what would be the Browns Point, Northeast Tacoma area. And he is doing a salmon bake right here for 1,500 Masons. The local Masons decided that they wanted to have a get together, and so they got Jerry here to put on the salmon bake. And Jerry Meeker, if you're not familiar with any of the stories of him, iconic figure to the area, and was really a delegate for the Puyallup people in their relationship with the white community of Tacoma. You could go on for a long time about that, but what I love about it is that salmon is the keystone. It's the bridge, the connection between everybody here. And it is a universal language that all people understand. And salmon are themselves integral to everything in the Pacific Northwest. They're a keystone species, which means that they're not just important to the environment, right? Like if you were to remove salmon in their entirety from the Pacific Northwest, it would be cataclysmic. So many predators and animals on the top of the food chain rely on them heavily. Bears and orca are the most like iconic, but you take them out, and everything down to the trees and the plants along these riparian zones that line the streams and rivers that the salmon spawn home to would die. And with them goes everything else. It's impossible to overstate just how important salmon are to the region. I think one of the best examples, I hope you've seen this, is that they reintroduced wolves to Yellowstone, right? And it was a fascinating thing as they put these wolf packs back into Yellowstone after they had been killed, almost to the brink of extinction. They found that the wolves changed the migratory patterns of elk and bison, that now these animals that were freely roaming the plains and the grasslands were keeping to the trees a little bit more or changing their paths to avoid the wolves. And that with them, the grass and how it grew also changed. And the animals that fed on the grass and aerated it and moved throughout and used it for shelter also changed. And that as each of these things fell back into place, the courses of rivers started to alter again now that plants prevented erosion from certain areas. And you see this terraforming of Yellowstone that happens just through the introduction of one species back into this elaborate web of invisible lines that are difficult, if not impossible, to see. And so understanding the impact of salmon in the region is the goal of so many. And this is kind of the impetus of the Soul Salmon project, which began in 2001. And a collection of artists got together and floated this idea that there should be something in the area to highlight the importance of salmon and act as not just a call to action for people. They weren't just looking for a way to motivate people to care about salmon and get back into it, but to reinforce that connection, to weave salmon back into the narrative of everyday person's lives. Because as you get, swept up in the living of modern life, it's easy to forget about the things that are intrinsically important to your life, but you're disconnected from them. And thus the Soul Salmon project was born. And this was started, like I said, in 2001. Here's a collection of the Soul Salmon as they're being disseminated out into the community. And there were 3 casts that were made, right? So it was originated and directed by a woman you're going to hear a lot tonight, Sarah Maljohani, and she was very much the lead sort of driving force and artist behind this project, and one of the artists responsible for actually making and sculpting the molds that would be used to create the fiberglass salmon here. And there was an adult male, an adult female, and then a juvenile here still attached to the yolk sac. And these became the 3 salmon that you see in the area. And I think the one that you see most often is the female salmon. That's the middle one right there. But the art on each of these was independent and unique. When they rolled out, they came out like this. This is a fiberglass salmon in its native form, raw and untouched. And then each of these was essentially given to an artist or a community of artists to decorate and then installed in the community. And it was a project where people would come and buy, they would sponsor a salmon, and then the salmon would be matched with an artist. And the sponsor of the salmon would find some place for it to be installed in the community out there. And I don't know how many of you were familiar with the parade of cows in the 1990s, but this might look familiar. This is actually the new parade. So a lot of these are from cows around the world. Some of these are in New York. But in 1999, Chicago launched this insanely successful campaign called Cows on Parade, and it featured 300 life-size fiberglass cows, which were then hand-painted by individual artists throughout and then left out in public on these concrete bases there to prevent theft. And after the exhibition was over, I forget just how long they were in Chicago, but they left them out for a long time there. They raised $3.4 million, right? Through campaigns, through auctions, through awareness, through auctioning off the cows themselves. $3.4 million, which was then given to a whole variety of charities. Now, if you, like I was at the time, are wondering, what's with the cows, man? The cows were actually swiped from Switzerland. So there's two stories that you'll encounter if you go do a deep dive on this research. The first is that the Great Chicago Fire of the 1880s is often blamed on this cow that was owned by a woman named Mrs. O'Leary. And there's like a bunch of lore around it, but essentially this cow starts the Great Chicago Fire, and then like a phoenix, the city was reborn from the ashes. Because without a fire, a phoenix is just a bird standing up. That's the romanticized version. The truth, in my opinion, is that the community leaders that came up with this fantastic idea were in Switzerland. They saw that the Swiss were doing this exact same project with several cows made out of fiberglass displayed around the city, both elevating the art scene and creating opportunities for altruistic auctions. Came immediately back to Chicago and like, we should do this. And I think there was even a lawsuit at one point where the Swiss were like, the hell, man. But all of that aside, genius imitates genius. The Soul Salmon project was heavily influenced by the Cows on Parade of Chicago, which was, of course, heavily inspired by the genius works in Switzerland. So this collection of artists gets together and they start the Soul Salmon project out of the small town of Chimacum, which, if you're not familiar with Chimacum, don't panic. Very few people are, but it is a sleepy little community, which I'm going to describe as in between Port Townsend and Bainbridge. I think you could get more regionally specific, but in my conversations with people, that seems to be the way that people get where it is. So Sarah Maljohani was really the driving force behind this, like I said. And she's like, okay, let's make some salmon, and then we will send them out into the community. People will buy them. They will have artists from that area, that real specific micro neighborhood, decorate them and disperse them. And thus, the Soul Salmon project was born. And just over 80 Soul Salmon were created, and they were sent out to communities throughout the Pacific Northwest. I think I've seen possibly some in Northern California was the farthest south that it went, but certainly all the way up into British Columbia. And here's some examples of them. There is a limited online gallery. If you're curious, you can go to soulsalmon.org sometime and take a look at a variety of these out there. But don't worry, I'm going to do my best to show you them today. But one of the like central elements of these was getting schools to engage with the idea of salmon and their importance to the community. And I don't know if you remember just how much has changed since 1999, but the world is dramatically different. And salmon in my lifetime have come way more to the forefront of the conversation, and certainly at a younger level. I don't think at a middle school level, we really talked about salmon very much, certainly not in the public school system. But now it's become really an important conversation as to how to maintain the longevity of the planet that we live on. And salmon are, of course, at the forefront of that. So all of these salmon were sent out not just to communities, but really to help people engage with schools. And so here's a few that were sent out so that either student groups or people affiliated with the schools could help decorate them. I think the ones that I've seen that I thought were absolutely the coolest is Governor Gary Locke, governor of Washington at the time, had a Soul Salmon where everybody was invited out during the Puyallup Fair, and they could sign it by stamping their thumbprint on it. So this Puyallup, Washington, fair out there had this, I think it was some exorbitant amount of people, certainly over 100,000, who came out to stamp their thumbprints all over this. And then a protective clear coat was put on the salmon, and it was installed down in Olympia. And so I don't know if anybody got to experience that. Yeah, absolutely. So I know Anchorage also got in on the whole Soul Salmon project as well. There was a salmon parade throughout Seattle of people with the Soul Salmon here. And so if you go throughout the Pacific Northwest today, you can still find a few of them. I think this is one of the more elaborate ones. This one ended up in British Columbia. But again, all of this was to highlight the importance of not just salmon, but the watershed. So if you are taking advantage of the third Thursdays, free admission to the Foss Waterway Seaport, and I always encourage people to do that, there is a lot of watershed projects going on right now. And this is what a watershed is. I'm sure, someone who's a hydrologist could detail this more elegantly than me, but all of this area where water is connected becomes your watershed. So areas that gather precipitation or snowpack that then create runoff, streams and tributaries and rivers that then flow into an ocean, all is part of the watershed. And this includes groundwater, and it focuses on our contributions and detriments to that water. And one of the coolest things I've seen schools and the seaport use is this like watershed table, which is essentially a plastic mat that's been molded so that it has various levels of topography. And it has mountains, it has villages, streams, tributaries, rivers, and then a big basin that represents like the sound or the ocean down at the bottom of it. And they sprinkle stuff all over it. You can put dirt. They do little things to represent fertilizer, car soap, dog poop, whatever. And then they pour water on top of it or spray it with a spray bottle, creating that precipitation. And then you just get to see a visceral visual display of that water collecting all of the garbage that we just leave and take for granted, and then suck it right down into the basin down there. And then the more advanced stuff can actually measure it and show just how gross it gets down there at the bottom. And that zoom out moment of letting people recognize on a macro scale what every action contributes to the greater whole was revolutionary. And Soul Salmon was a big impetus in helping people understand watersheds and their effects on them. If you're curious, the city of Tacoma is often listed under the Green River to Wamish Rivershed. For ages now. We have drawn not just hydroelectric power, but the majority of our drinking water and city water from the Green River watershed. Even though technically we are now listed under the White or Nisqually or Chambers watersheds because those actually encompass Pierce County. But Green River, you can see just right there up at the top, is the vast majority of our watershed. This was such a successful project with the Soul Salmon that in 2002, 1 year after the launch of it, Sarah Maljohani and her husband, Tom J., won the Hood Canal Environmental Achievement Award, which annually recognizes annually recognizes a variety of people for their positive environmental impact. And this one recognized Sarah and Tom specifically for 20 years of salmon work in the region. Soul Salmon was not just a shot in the dark. It wasn't something that they were like, oh, shoot. This was 2 decades of them as artists and activists working to preserve salmon and the salmon narrative in the greater area, and then launching this project to get more people engaged. And it was hugely successful. The day, though, you would be hard-pressed to know. So these pictures are all from Road Architects or roadarch.com, who goes around taking phenomenal shots of things around the United States. But there's several pages dedicated to fish sculptures that they've encountered. And these 3 on the top here are specifically Tacoma ones. Because here's what we know. Here's the mystery. Remember the missing fish? It's not just the actual salmon that have disappeared from the region, but it's our soul salmon as well. There are 10 that we know of that were purchased by City Council member Bill Evans and then dispersed out into the community, sent out into various streams, if you will, to go out and then respawn back. And only a few of them remain. And I'm going to see if you guys can recognize a few of these from the community. This is from, like I said, roadarch.com. But here's a better look when you go through the articles about fish that were being sent out to the area. These are the ones in particular that were announced in 2001 that we know about. So these 8-foot-long fiberglass salmon start showing up here. 11th Street and Broadway was the Peace Salmon. That was commissioned by the Maritime Fest artists. The other one was canned salmon, which we'll actually have a lot more information about, which was commissioned by individual employees of the City of Tacoma's Environmental Services Division. There was one on North 27th and Proctor, the Glass Heart salmon. And that one was the crown jewel, I'm going to describe as, because Bill Evans, the guy who really kicked this off in the Tacoma area, was the driving heart behind that. And in fact, it sat outside of his store, the Pacific Northwest shop, just off of Proctor Street, where it is today. And then it talks about a few more of the salmon out there. Hopefully you recognize Sparky. I don't know if anyone's been in the Proctor neighborhood recently. The Sparky is the Dalmatian soul salmon there, who I think is the most beloved by children throughout the area. And then, of course, the one at the bottom here is the most... how do you describe it? The most beloved, the most talked about. This was the storybook salmon. And the storybook salmon used to be out in front of a Tacoma public library. And when that library eventually was shut down and the statue was in pretty rough shape, they decided that the best thing to do would then to be put it into the archives of the library. So it exists, but it's not one that you can still see today, unfortunately. And I feel like when I was talking to people about soul salmon, this was the one that people had the fondest memories about. And they're not without some drama, I guess. So there were 2 salmon specifically that ended up in the sort of Old Town region. There is the Old Town salmon itself, and then there was another salmon that was in Puget Park or Puget Gulch down in the area there. And the Puget Gulch one ended up getting installed in 2006. And when it was installed, it disappeared for a little while. So these are the ones that you can still see today. This is the glass heart salmon, still in front of the Pacific Northwest shop, owned by Mr. Bill Evans. And this is what it looks like today. These are from just a few days ago. And you can see the idea behind each of these was that they would have unique art on each of them, that they would be uniform in their salmonness, but unique in their design and representative of each community. And then the bases were supposed to have these symbols about Watershed in the area, which is fitting because if you've been to Puget Gulch, you may have seen this. There's a hidden rock in Puget Park that has this bronze band around it, and then on the top, a bronze oyster shell. And that was also designed by Sarah Mal-Johanni. She's the artist behind this, and it represents a community covenant. These were installed all throughout Puget Sound region, and they represent this conversation about watersheds, and that we each have a commitment individually to the whole as a greater area. So each of these rocks is a boundary marker, demarking different watersheds and responsibility areas and territories. And I just think it's interesting because not only is it wild that Sarah Mal-Johanni has another sculpture down there, but it's so close to one of her other ones, connected, but not at the same time. So the importance of salmon, right? I feel like I could go on for days about it, but this becomes the rallying cry in all of the articles that start talking about soul salmon as they splash onto the scene, let's say. And you start to see people really getting into the idea. So here was a list of areas just in Puget Sound where it caught on. Bainbridge, Belfair, Friday Harbor, Port Townsend, of course, had quite a few. Chimacum, the cradle, the spawning origin of this whole thing. Mount Vernon, Port Hadlock, Fountainhead, Patagonia Store, University up in, I'm trying to remember. I think it was University Place. And then, of course, Seattle had quite a few. Olympia and Tacoma had, in my opinion, the majority. This was one of the ones that was my favorite. This is canned salmon. This one was downtown for quite a long time, right near the Broadway transfer station. And this was all entirely made of recycled cans, which were painstakingly folded into this pattern by Chris Wooten and Vladimir Shakov, pictured here. This is what it looked like over time. You can see a lot of that color faded from the cans after, I think, about a decade. And this is currently not there. You can see where it was right by the transfer station. This is not there at the moment, and I have not been able to track down where it was. And this has become the great game and investigation for me. Where are the soul salmon today? Well, we know that there's one inside the Foss Waterway Seaport. Where it came from remains a mystery. Like I said, there's limited documentation about where each of these went and which artist had what. The two most famous salmon, ironically, are ones that went missing. Very early on, this large fiberglass salmon down in Puget Gulch was installed in 2006, and it was iconic for the area because members of the Puyallup tribe came out and blessed it. And it became really important to the community because it was installed not just to create that conversation about salmon, but as an exciting touch point on Puget Gulch. So this is what it looks like today. This is a picture I took last summer. And here's sort of a rundown on Puget Gulch. And this is so important because Puget Gulch originally had a salmon-bearing stream that flowed in it. And over the years, there became so much development and pollution and destruction of not just the gulch itself, but the point where it actually fed out into Commencement Bay. And, you know, I've talked at length about the various things, not just like the Asarco situation. The Asarco smelting plant had a devastating effect on all of Commencement Bay's marine life. But a lot of that came down to things like eelgrass, which supports the community and environment that then goes on to support salmon. Eelgrass is vital to these young salmon being able to hide and not get consumed before they're big enough to fight for themselves, long before they have an opportunity to return home and spawn. And Puget Gulch became a real focal point for the community, where after a tremendous amount of city cleanup and an installation of these underground waterways allow the salmon to come back. So these, they're predominantly subterranean now, but they're fish ladders that allow fish, salmon, to spawn back from Commencement Bay upstream into Puget Gulch. And so when you find this rock, which is deeply hidden inside Puget Gulch, it's marked with, "To honor the caring citizens, governments, tribes, and businesses of Pierce County for lasting stewardship of Puget Sound Water Quality Authority, 1996. And like I said, this was created by Sarah Maljohani in 96, 5 or 6 years before the Soul Salmon project would even take off. And it's a reminder of the incredible work that is done and will be done creating these clean watersheds again for fish, not just fiberglass ones, to return to Puget Gulch. The glassheart salmon is one that stands as sort of a community cry there. You can see its prominent location right off of Proctor, and of course, next to the Proctor Farmers Market, allows people to have constant interaction with it and remember how important salmon are to the community. The one that caught people's attention, though, was this Puget Gulch one, because after it was blessed by the Puyallup tribe and installed in the park, it disappeared. It vanished. And fortunately, it was found just a few days after, when a guy called it in. He was like, "I think I've got your salmon." So police show up to his house. It's in his garage. And his account says that he traded bicycle parts for the salmon. And sort of the working theory, this is one journalist's opinion on this, me. Somebody looking to salvage their life and get some bicycle parts stole the salmon and then hawked it for what they needed. And the street value of an 8-pound salmon isn't what it used to be in the 1800s. So this is a depressing time. But they managed to get it back. They secured it much more than they did before, and it has remained in the gulch for quite some time. Now, the other one that created the most controversy whatsoever was the Old Town salmon. I hope this is the one that people are most familiar with. It is in Gateway Park down in Old Town, Tacoma, and it was created with all of these Sepia-tone photographs of Old Town's history installed underneath pieces of glass to create the salmon scales. And this went missing. It disappeared. I'm trying to remember. It was installed in 2001 as part of the Bill Evans campaign of getting salmon out there. Disappeared in August of 2006 and was an absolute mystery for the region. Nobody could find it. And it became one of the great mysteries of Tacoma. The police were involved. Community sponsors were involved. Meetings for the business district of Old Town were frequently led by this cry of, "We have to return the salmon." And the just unbelievable allegory of it, as someone who tells stories for a living, this is so delicious. That this community gets together and now their salmon are gone and they rally behind this effort to find it. Where is the salmon? What will our community be without it? And how do we get it back? And these were the questions plaguing not just Old Town, but all of Tacoma for some time. One of the only salmon to not be stolen is Sparky here. And I'd like to believe it's because of a deep respect for the Tacoma Fire Department. You can see Sparky is a little sunburned, as are we all through so many years, but Sparky remains not only as an icon for the Proctor area, but one of the most memorable fish, obviously, because a Dalmatian salmon is a rarity. So it ends up being, right, 10 years. 10 years go by, and anonymously, in the middle of the night, as mysteriously as it disappeared, the Old Town salmon shows back up in Old Town, just with a note on it that says, "We enjoyed the art, happy to return it now." A decade goes by, and still there are so many unanswered questions. People aren't sure if it was a frat prank gone too far, if it was an eccentric Tacoma citizen, or if it was just some low life representing the story of the salmon on a much deeper level than they ever knew. But they eventually get this salmon back and then re-secure it with tremendous amounts of care now, making sure that the Old Town salmon is not abducted from the community again. And this becomes now the like symbol for the region, and is iconic, I think, now more than ever. So the story of the salmon comes and goes. I feel like it hit a flashpoint with the fishing wars here in the area, which honestly deserves its own virtual tour entirely. But by fighting the tribe for fishing rights to the area, the tribe, Puyallup predominantly, stands up and says enough is enough. We were promised in our treaties traditional fishing rights to this area, and that has to be acknowledged. And they were not in any way. This eventually goes on to be a massive court decision, which establishes now the precedent that treaty rights are the law of the land. You know, they are on the same parallel as the Constitution, and they absolutely have to be respected as the treaty that they are. And so salmon were really high in the public consciousness for a while and then drifted away until I think the Soul Salmon project really injected new life into the community and people's understanding and caring about salmon. And now that they are, as sculptures, dwindling from the area, disappearing, it is time, I think, for some new ideas to spawn back home to this region. And that's where the Foss program really comes into play here. So the Foss Seaport works really heavily with a lot of local fish hatcheries to take fish and then introduce them to schools throughout the area. And these schools work with the salmon from eggs until they hatch and they grow to a level where they can be released into streams. They then go out, live 4 to 5 years in the ocean, and spawn back to the streams from where they were released. And salmon are a miracle. It's unbelievable how just cool these creatures are, because they can recognize the smell of their stream from miles away. It's estimated that by the time an adult salmon hits Puget Sound, it can detect particles of its home stream in that water and follow it like the most intense bloodhound you can imagine through hundreds or thousands of miles back to the exact spot where they were released or hatched. And I want to share with you guys a little bit. This is a video I got to make about the fish program. This is out at one of the local hatcheries down in Puyallup Valley, and what they kind of go through in not just ensuring that you can find these salmon again, but when they do spawn back, how do you know it's your fish? Check it out.
My name's Grant Lee. I'm with the Northwest Indian Fisheries Commission. Right now we are adipose clipping all the hatchery Chinook. There's about a little over 1 million probably Chinook to get through. These are just the raceways all the Chinook are kept in. So this is our fish pump. We have one of these that'll go with each trailer. And it's just a really low stress way to move fish into our trailer from wherever. And less work for me, because I can just let it roll. We'll pump them into the trailer, and they'll run through our machines. They'll get counted, measured, and get their adipose fin clipped off. and then they'll go into these two nature spawns here. So there'll be 500,000 probably in this pond and 500,000 in the next pond. Well, these are Clark's Creek stock, so they just get released from here and they come right back. These fish here will return here in 4 to 5 years. We used to do everything by hand, and now we can do, this trailer has 6 machines that you'll see, and a typical day I could do 60,000. We have a couple that are shorter. Some of the hatcheries are way more tight to get in and out of these big trailers, so those ones have 5 lines, but they still can do 50,000 plus a day. So the fish are out in the raceways. Then we pump them up into this tank, and then this will pump them up into here. So they end up in there, and then they go through these 2 openings here. They get measured, and then every click that you hear, that's one of these flippers opening up, and it opens up to a tube that sends them to one of these machines that are all based on fish length. And they end up in here, and they don't like being against this white background, so they'll all try and fight to get into this little corner. Fish comes in, it gets to the end, it trips a sensor, a set of padded clamps will close down on it, and it arches that fish's back. And we have to sort them by length because hopefully that adipose fin will be in that window. And it'll take a before picture, clip the fin, and then take an after picture. This was run pretty well. You might not see an error, but if it leaves a little too much of the fin, it'll fail it, and it'll get kicked into a bucket, and those will get done by hand also.
Adipose fin clipping is part of a 2-step process that helps scientists and fisheries identify and distinguish between wild salmon and hatchery salmon. The other half of the process involves the injection of a small piece of wire with a unique numerical identification code on it.
So when we're tagging, that needle shoots the tag in like right there. And like if this is the little sinus cavity, the tag's only like that big. So you have some wiggle room, but if you can get it right in that sinus cavity, it'll stay in there until they're an adult. So like one length of tag would be like that.
The tags are so small, you actually need a special scope just to see the numbers on them. These specialty trailers have really streamlined the process of tagging salmon for release. Absolutely wild, right? So when these fish return, if they are hatchery salmon, they'll be missing their adipose fin, which that machine is terrifying to me. But it clips that little fin off so that you can identify quickly which of these fish came back. And then if you have the time, you can fish out that little nasal tattoo wire and then identify which fish is which. And it's an absolutely stunning process. Like he said, he can do 60,000 of those a day. And they tag each of those fish so that we know where they are from, where they return to, and then how successful the program was. And it's astounding. What's been so cool about the program is that now kids get to see how important salmon are as a keystone species from, like I said, the roots on up. The most iconic things that you think of with salmon are, of course, us. It's a tremendous economic development tool. Not only are salmon delicious, but they bring in millions of dollars to the local economy, both on a commercial sense and recreationally, as well as the fact that bears and orca in particular depend upon them. For bears, it's a tremendous amount of the calories that they need every year before they enter hibernation. For orca, it is a part of their diet that is absolutely essential. And some orca, in fact, won't feed on anything other than very specific types of salmon. And as those numbers decline, the orca go with them. And if you can imagine how influential wolves are to, terraforming Yellowstone, imagine how much more so orca are to a marine environment. Take it on down. It's not just that other creatures like eagles and otters and mink also feed off of this flux, but see it like almost a bloodstream. This injection of life seasonally into an area is unbelievably important. And the fact that it's developed this way over millennia creates this very delicate system. It's like the Pacific Northwest draws a fresh breath in every fall. And when these salmon spawn back to their streams, up through the tendrils of the woods and the forests, and spawn and then die, it's an injection, just a like force dump of nutrients into the area that seep into the water and the soil and the roots. And they've estimated that, in fact, I'm trying to remember the exact number, some huge percentage of the forests, the evergreen 500 to 1,000-year-old trees up in British Columbia and beyond, are reliant on this annual injection of nutrients into the soil from the salmon. If you remove them from the equation, it's a domino effect up and down, from the biggest to the smallest creatures in the area. We are all dependent upon salmon in the area. And the Soul Salmon project was a beautiful reminder of that. If you're interested in more facts and figures, one of my favorite resources for salmon is the Wild Salmon Center. You can find them online. And they talk a ton about, just like looking at that sort of macro view I was talking about, how important salmon are to all of us and where we can see their impacts throughout the area. But if you're interested, the Foss Waterway Seaport has one of their salmon tanks down there right now as well. You can go check it out. And online, I'm going to see if I can get the link for you guys here really quick. I put it up somewhere. Here we go. So I'm going to put this link into the comments here. And what this is to their workshop. And I've got a video of it here. They've got these laser cut machined parts. And if you take their workshop, you can go down and actually build one of these Soul Salmon automations. That's an automaton. One of these moving fish. So that's a program that they're offering right now as one of the many cool interactive educational programs that are now on offer at the Foss Waterway Seaport. I know that they'll be releasing more soon. They also had a diesel program, learning about marine diesels, which filled up right away. But I know there is still space on creating the automated fish. Why is it such a difficult word to say? Yowzer. Well, thank you guys for coming out tonight and getting to experience this. I hope that we've learned two things. One, what the heck a soul salmon is. And two, the importance of salmon in the community. And one goes with the other. The soul salmon were here from the start to remind us how important they are to our community. And I personally would love to see a resurgence of it. I think the final figures, after less than a year, they started in January of 2001. And then by that fall, they had kind of wrapped up the program. 80 plus soul salmon had gone out to the community. And it was something like $43,000 was generated from it and then dispersed to salmon and ecological preservation charities throughout the area, just to help ensure that the next generation would know what a salmon is and not just have to take an 8-foot fiberglass statue's word for it. So thank you guys. If you have questions, please let me know. Until next time, I will see you guys out there. I believe next month I get the honor of talking about the Willits Canoe Shop and their legacy, wherein the two Willits brothers ended up, one literally died in the middle of a project, and the other brother just sealed it up. And for decades, it was like a hidden tomb of just like tools were left on the bench. And so you get to see one of the most prolific and influential canoe shops mid-stroke. So check it out. It's coming up soon. Thank you guys so much. Have a wonderful evening and keep on exploring.